We're going to have part 2 now of our continuing series with Dr. Ronald Lawson. And many of us thought it was Larson for a long time. But just one letter makes a difference. Anyway, I just was talking to Dr. Lawson a little bit to get to know more about him. If you could tell from his accent, he's from down south, deep south, as Dr. Brandstetter said, Australia. And he's from Queensland, always in the north of Australia. He has his PhD in history and sociology from the University of Queensland, and came to America on a Fulbright scholarship at Columbia University in New York City, and stayed there for several years, getting grants. And you went to Queens. I know it's in Queens now. It's Queens College. If you've ever been to New York City, there's colleges all over that city. It's a big city, as you know. But anyway, Queens College, and he did writing, professorial work. And once he retired, he moved to Asheville, North Carolina. And after he was there a while, he moved here to Southern California, where it's warmer and better for one's health, and he knew more people here. So anyway, Dr. Lawson, we're just thrilled to have you here again. Now you're going to have 2 more parts. So this is 2, and then anyway, let's just bow our heads. Again, Father, we thank you that we can be here today, be with Dr. Lawson. We ask that you watch over him and be with our group today. We pray in your name. Amen. Okay, I think you're on now.
Thank you, Doris. Am I on? I have an explanation to make at the beginning. My face is swollen as a result of dental surgery on Thursday. So I hope that it doesn't affect the way I pronounce words too badly. My upper lip is quite swollen, so I don't know what that will do to me. I told you last week that I'm writing 4 books, a series, and since I have 4 weeks with you, I'm taking a piece from each of the 4 books to give you a sense of what I'm doing. Last week I introduced you to sort of the overall theory at the beginning, and then we looked at the chapter at the second book, which deals with Adventist and social issues. Today we're coming to the third book, which is going to be entitled at the moment, From American Sect to Global Denomination, The Growth and Spread of Seventh-day Adventism. And that volume looks at Adventist strategies, outreach strategies, on numerical growth, comparing it with Mormons and witnesses, the geographic distributions of all 3, the statistical reliability of the membership data for all 3, and then the way immigration has changed the face of Adventism in many countries in the developed world, who are we reaching and who are we neglecting, Americanization versus contextualization, governing a local church, and the roles and significance of congregations. So that's what this particular volume will be about. And today I'm going to be taking from 4 different papers. I published 5 papers on, together with 2 friends of mine, on Mormons, Adventists, and witnesses. All 3 were born in the 19th century in America. All 3 have become global. So it makes sense to compare what's happened to them over time. And I'd like to have done that with the Pentecostals too, but they're very decentralized, and it's very difficult to get decent data on them. So we're looking at, you can see the title there. I should mention that the 2 people who I write with, one is a former Mormon missionary who's no longer a Mormon, and comes from a very storied Mormon family. And the other one is, he married a woman who became a witness. And since she will meet socialize with only witnesses, he has to socialize with witnesses. And since he isn't a witness, he became interested in the witnesses, and he's a statistician, and he really knows the stuff. He's not a sociologist, he's actually a forester, and for some reason he has to know lots of statistics. So these are the people who I've been writing with. Okay. Here we have the growth of world membership for the three groups over time. Mormons, of course, started first, so they got a leg up on the other two. We started ahead of the Witnesses. The Witnesses, in fact, started in the late 1860s, but they were very disorganised under their first leader, and it wasn't until the second leader that they started to become much better organised, and you can get statistics for them. You'll notice that the Adventists caught up with the Mormons between 1990 and 2000. We passed the Mormons, as far as official membership is concerned, somewhere in the late 1990s. And then we've been growing much faster, and so we've gone ahead, and our official membership at the end of 2017 was 20.7 million. Next one, here is that same table graphed, and you can see that the yellow line, which is the Adventists, passes and rises above the green line in the 1990s. Next one. Let's look at the official totals regionally. Now this becomes interesting. By the way, because these tables are taken from 4 different papers, there's traps to them, because sometimes I have the Witnesses in the middle and sometimes I have the Adventists in the middle. And I can be fooled over that too. But this one, the Witnesses are in the middle. Notice that when it comes to in what regions the Mormons are the largest, it's in 2009, it was in North America, Central America, and in Oceania, which includes Australia and New Zealand. In other words, very much in the developed world. And the region where the Witnesses are by far the largest is Europe. And where Adventists are the largest is everywhere else, which is the developing world. So Africa, the various parts of Africa, South America, the Caribbean, we've been running neck and neck with the Mormons forever in the South Pacific. Next one. Notice the grey ones. You'll see that in 1960 the Mormons were practically all in the United States. The good part of the Witnesses and Adventists were in the United States too, but the Mormons in particular had not really become very global at that time. That was going to change. In the next one, where we're up to 1990, you'll see the diversity of Adventism compared to the others is becoming clear. And the Witnesses, the Mormons have moved ahead in South America and in Central America, but it's still very strong. Most of the membership, well over half, in the United States. If we come to 2009, the next one, this is where Adventism rises to the largest of the three, and its diversity is just enormous compared to the others. And it's spread especially into the developing world, as we will see more. Coming on, in the next table, here's the average annual increase per quinquennium in the official membership. Okay? You'll notice, look at the Witnesses first of all. This time the Adventists are in the middle. The Witnesses really grew after World War II, especially in Europe. And I think that has to do with the fact that they stood firm against the Nazis and were persecuted so badly during the Nazi period. And they were admired. And as a result of that, people took them seriously when the war ended. And they grew enormously in the 10 years after the war ended. They grew again also between 70 and 75 because they were saying that Jesus was coming in 1975. And if you have a date, people come. The Mormons, they've been going for a long time. You'll see in this period their largest quinquennium ended in 1965. You'll notice that the Mormons and the Witnesses really went down after the 1990s. Their growth rate. Adventist growth rate went down too, but we were fastest in the 1980s. But we remained considerably faster, greater growth than the Mormons and the Witnesses. That's why we've gone ahead in our official membership. The next one. Here are the total baptisms. Now this is quite mind-boggling. Adventist baptisms are larger by far than both Mormons and Witnesses throughout the whole period from 1986 on. And as we get down into the 21st century, we just simply leave the others for dead. They're 250,000 per year, and we're 1 million to 1.25 million per year. But we don't go ahead as fast as these numbers would indicate. So this means that we're also taking off a fairly large number. In other words, we've got a flow in and out.
Question, does that include the Mormons baptizing for the dead?
No,
Thank you.
but it does include Mormons baptizing their kids when they're 8 years of age. They baptize younger. In the next slide, here it is graphed. You can see the way that the Adventist baptismal rate really has gone ahead of the others. The next one, and we're still talking about official membership, the official membership in the developed world. And this is where Adventism has done poorly compared to the other two. I mean, look at the Mormons. They've got in North America, in 2000, where are they? 2009, yes, in 2009, they've got 6.2 million. Adventists got 1 million, Witnesses just a little bit less, a little bit more. Then when we come to Europe, that's especially where the Witnesses have done very well, especially in Western Europe. In Asia, the Witnesses have done extremely well in Japan. The only developed country that's counted as a developed country that we do very well in is South Korea, and that's the most recent addition to the developed world. And where I come from Australia and New Zealand, Adventists were there so much earlier than either the Witnesses or the Mormons, but over time, both of them moved ahead of Adventists. We just have not done well in the developed world compared to them. The next one. Now this is an interesting one because this one divides the countries into 3 categories, high, medium and low, of gross national income per capita. And you'll notice that the Mormons, especially because of their concentration in the United States, were in 1960 heavily in the high category, and even in 2006, more than half were still in the high category. The Witnesses, more than half in the high category in 1960, falling to the maximum, the largest, being in the middle category in 2006. And then compare that with the Adventists. We start being largest in the middle category in 1960, and by 2006, our largest group is in the low gross national income per capita. So they're very different distributions, the three groups.
This worldwide or?
This is worldwide. Looking at countries as the unit. Now, if you look at the next one, here it is graphed. If you compare, for each group, the first column with the last column, you can see the changes, but you'll see that the Mormons are still considerably in the bottom, the blue column, and the witnesses become dominated by the middle one by the end. And look at the Adventists. We've got very small proportion in the high national income per capita, and mostly in the other two, and gone to the largest in the grey one, which is the least gross national income. Now let's come to the next group. Now here we're looking at Mexico, and I look at Mexico because Mexico has the most interesting, detailed census that I've found in the world with religion statistics, which it enables you to run religion by all sorts of other things, which you can't do in many countries. So the Mexican one is really worth looking at, and I've got several slides here on Mexico. Now, first of all, let's look at the highest education completed, and I'm looking at the censuses for 2000 and 2010. So here we're not looking at official membership, we're looking at those who say they belong, okay? So it's a different measure. Notice that the Adventists are predominant in both years, but it's improving gradually, among those with no education or some elementary. They're much less educated than the others, with the witnesses being the largest, with those who've finished elementary school or have done junior high school, and the Mormons being largest among those who've finished high school or have become university graduates. Okay, so an enormous difference again between the three. And yet, this is strange, isn't it? Because in Mexico, Adventists run 3 universities. The other 2 don't run any. And at Montemorelos, we have a medical school and a dental school into the bargain. What's going on? How come we've got these universities and yet we have such few educated people compared to the others? Basically, our people are so poor that they can't afford to live away from home. They can't afford to travel. More than half the students at the universities are not from Adventist families. And the next one, the next slide, compares, let's look at 2010. You'll notice, if you look at the top 3 categories, which are the least educated, am I doing this right? No, they're the best educated. They're the best educated at the top. You'll see how far down the Mormons come, including people who finished high school and gone beyond. And then witnesses in the middle and the Adventists the least. And then if you look at the bottom 2 categories, and you look at the Adventists, you'll see how large they are among the uneducated compared to the others. Let's move on to the next one. Here we have income categories. And the Mexican census gives these categories: the minimum wage or less, between 1 and 3 times the minimum wage, between 3 and 5 times the minimum wage, and more than 5 times the minimum wage. Well, having looked at the education, it should not be surprising to see that Adventists, almost half, earn the minimum wage or less. The Mormons, on the other hand, have 36.2%, between 3 and 5 times, well, more than 3 times the minimum wage, all the way up. So they have 36% in those two categories. We have 14%. The witnesses, again, are in between. Now, the Mormons tithe the same way as Adventists do. You can imagine how much more tithe the Mormons get than Adventists do. If you look at the graphing of this, in 2000, again you can see the enormous difference between the Mormon column on one extreme and the Adventist column on the other extreme. I should make some comments on this. The Mormons baptize a great number of poor people, but they don't keep them. There is a middle to upper middle class tone about a Mormon congregation. And the poor people just don't feel comfortable there and they don't stay. Why are the witnesses better educated than the Adventists? Isn't this surprising? I think the solution is that you've got to be literate to become a witness, because everything depends on the publications and upon studying and going through long Bible studies and being able to read and discuss or learn. The Adventists, on the other hand, we educate our kids, but then they may leave.
Question, the minimum wage, does Mexico have a minimum wage? Or is
Yes,
that, so
yes.
that's the Mexican?
The Mexican minimum wage. But below the minimum wage is pretty low. Let's look at the next one, the regional concentration. This helps to explain things. The central region is where Mexico City is. You'll notice that both the Mormons and witnesses have got fairly large percentages in that region. Adventists are quite small there. Northern, yes, they go door to door. They go door to door where they can send people and put the Mormon missionaries up. They're not going to go to the rural areas. In the northeast, which is also a fairly well-developed region, again you've got Mormons and witnesses to a less extent, and Adventists not very much. Where are Adventists? They're in the south-southeast. In other words, they're in the mountainous, very poor region down the south. And that's where we've got more than 3/4 of our members. So that helps to explain why our people are poor, why they're less educated. But this pattern that I'm telling you about here is true in much of the developing world. In much of the developing world, our colleges and boarding schools are more than half non-Adventist, because our members are too poor to live away from home to travel.
Question, what area of Mexico is where the Mormons have their colonies?
Have their,
Colonies.
that's in the northeast, I think, if I remember correctly.
Northeast, okay.
So
Yeah,
the
that's a
second,
very high.
yes.
Part of those are probably Americans.
So if you look at the regional concentration in the graph, the same thing is clear again. The Adventists enormously concentrated in the south, and the dark blue, the Mormons, and to a less extent the witnesses, and in the more developed parts of Mexico. Now this is an intriguing one. Let's look at the next one. Fertility. Now in America, we're used to Adventists being less fertile than Mormons or Catholics, right? In Mexico, we're more fertile. All the way down, from older women to younger women, though the number of kids goes down. with age, but maybe they're still producing. But probably the families are smaller. But we're larger than the Catholics, we're larger than the Mormons. We've got the largest fertility rate of them all. Now let's come to the next one. This is a fairly complicated table, and I need to go through it with you carefully. Now, what I'm
The fertility rate correlates with war in England,
yes.
so that's why we have.
And when you've got a piece of land and you want the kids to help farm, what I do in the next table, I'm now comparing the census data with the official data. Okay, so how many people, and I've done this for as many censuses as I can find where this religion is counted. We've got 54 countries, their censuses. And I'm looking to see how the census numbers compare with those who claim that they are adherents, who identify with the group. Now, first of all, let's look at the differences in the official data. There are some differences between the three groups. This is important. The Mormons count the children as well as the members, as the adults as members, because they baptize kids at age 8, and if any committed Mormon family is going to dedicate the child, and once the child is dedicated, it is counted. Okay, so they count everybody. So we would expect that their official membership and those who claim to be members would be about the same. Adventists, as you know, do not count people before they're baptized. So we would expect the adherents, the census data, to be larger than the official data, if the official data is valuable, is reliable. The witnesses have a very strange system. They do not count baptized people as members. The people who get counted by the witnesses as members are those who witness. They call them publishers. So they're counting the number of publishers, the number of active and at witnessing people. So that's why they end up with much lower numbers, because not everybody witnesses. Though they think that they should. You don't count if you don't. So if the ratio between census and adherence is 1.0, that means they're the same. Okay? If it's less than 1.0, it means that the roles are exaggerated. If it's above 1.0, it means that the roles are low compared to those who claim to be members. Now let's take a look at the top 2/3 of that table. And, well, it's all summarised. I don't give you every country. I've got a version of this, but it's just far too many countries. But the largest countries are here, plus another 32. And if you look at the total, so that the 2/3 of the way down, you can see that the Mormon ratio is 0.28. In other words, the number of people who claim to be members in the census is not much more than a quarter of those who they've got on the rolls. So their membership would seem to be grossly exaggerated. And that makes sense, because with Mormons, they count you, once you've been baptized, they count very carefully if you've been baptized. And then they take very little notice of whether you continue to go to church or not. And indeed, because you've got to be on the roll to go to the third heaven, according to their doctrine, they do not take you off the roll until you reach 110 if they don't know who you are. In other words, if you've disappeared, and probably if you've disappeared, you're not even going to church, but you stay on the rolls till you be 110 to make sure that they don't take anyone off and make them miss out on going to the third heaven. How are we going time? That's what we're doing.
10 more minutes.
If you look at Adventists, 1.34. Okay, so that suggests that we've got children and bigger families in the developing world, so that there's more people who claim to be members in the census than there are on the rolls. When we come to witnesses, and this really surprised the people at the Watchtower, the number of people who claim to be witnesses is more than twice the number of people who are counted as publishers. They assured me that you don't stay a witness. You don't think of yourself as witness if you're no longer publishing. You're certainly not going to church, they say, because that's all about preparing to publish, to go out witnessing. And so they were absolutely amazed that this turned out to be more than twice, especially in the developing world. Excuse me. Now, we had to include the United States, even though we don't ask the question, the religion question in our census anymore, because the United States was so important to Mormons, and we had been told that they're much more likely to attend and to keep attending in the United States than they are in other parts of the world. So we couldn't leave the United States out. And the witnesses also have got a very considerable percentage in the United States. It's their largest country. For Adventists, it's our third largest country, so it's still an important country. So we took 5 surveys in recent years, large surveys, and we put them together to form a US proxy average of those who claimed to be Mormons, Adventist witnesses. So let's look at the US proxy average, and you'll see that, yes, indeed, the Mormons are much closer to 1. It's 0.9. So, in other words, the official membership is still larger than the census, but not by nearly as much a gap as in the rest of the world. For Adventists, it's about the same as the rest of the world. And for witnesses, a little bit more. So it's even, in the United States, even more exaggerated, and more lower than it should be. So the major difference between the rest of the world and the United States is for the Mormons, 0.28 versus 0.9. So let's put the two together. Well, we're going to do that in the next table, I think. So let's do that. Let's look at it in the next table. We did it in 2 ways. We just threw all the countries into the hopper. And we see that the ratio then becomes for the Mormons 0.64, for the Adventists 1.33, for witnesses 2.12. You end up with Mormons who have 16 million on the roll at the end of 2017, coming down to 10.3 million. You have Adventists rising from 20.7 to 27.5, and witnesses rising more than doubling from 8.2 to 17.5. But I think the better indication is method 2, because as we saw, the United States for the Mormons is so different from what it is in the rest of the world. So we're trying to now make up for the countries where there is not a suitable census. So if we keep the United States out of the equation and deal with it separately, what we get is the Mormons now come down almost to half of what they claim. The Adventists, much the same, and the witnesses, much the same. Now notice then that the reordering, the order of the 3 in size is dramatically changed. It goes from Adventists, Mormons, witnesses in the official data to Adventists, witnesses, Mormons, the witnesses rise dramatically because of their strange counting of their official membership, and the Mormons fall really low because they just keep counting the people who've left. So that's the end of my presentation. Now it's over to you. We've got plenty of time.
Right. What about the problem of inflated membership? In other words, some of the divisions are cleaning up their membership now, and in one case, I think there were several 100,000 members that really weren't still active.
More than one counts.
Right, and there's no advantage to clean your records up because then you have more delegates to General Conference.
Yes.
And so there's some ways that the women's ordination votes have really not represented the true membership figure. So how does that relate to what you're talking about? And another question is that my understanding is that some of the baptisms that take place are kind of mass baptisms. The level of understanding of Adventist doctrines in some areas where they're baptized is not what it would be here in the States, where you go through an intensive kind of a study. Now, maybe that's better because you're basically accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior and not all the eschatological intricacies that we go through in a typical series of lessons. And your comment of the witnesses was very intense. You know, it's very hard. I think it's very hard to become a Mormon. But I think maybe it's a lot easier in some countries where they have these mass baptisms to become an Adventist. So how do these factor in?
Good question, Dave. You may believe I've paid a great deal of attention to this stuff. The Adventist membership became extremely exaggerated in the development, in many parts of the developing world in particular, during the 80s. That was when we had 1,000 days of reaping. What was the other one? We had two big campaigns to baptize in large numbers. And I was in the developing countries of the world in all the divisions during the 80s, and I really ran into a great deal of the pastors hated it. They were being forced to do 4 campaigns in a year in many places. They said, I can't pay attention to the people I've just baptized. I can't nurture them. I can't ground them because I've got to go on and keep baptizing. We turned it into a competition between the divisions. The Inter-American division came up past South America at that time, and the African divisions were beginning to grow, and they were competing with each other. And 2 of them are really neck and neck right now. As a matter of fact, they're both about the same membership, and it became absolutely clear that the membership was hugely exaggerated. So David Trim was important in drawing attention to this. He's the head of the Office of Statistics. And the General Conference started to put pressure at the beginning of the 21st century on the countries to have a cleaning of the rolls. And as a result, some countries did it fairly successfully, thoroughly, in the first decades of, in the first years of this century. For example, the membership in Brazil was cut by a very strong, large amount, but they've grown up past that now. The Philippines was cut by about 300,000 or 400,000. More recently, pressure's been put on India, and they because they had become our largest country, and no one believed the statistics, and they've taken off about 400,000, if I remember correctly. Still probably considerably exaggerated, but not nearly as badly as it was. So yes, I think the 1.34 or whatever it is that I was talking about for Adventists shows that there's kids, but it also unbaptized members, people who attend but have not yet been baptized. But it also reflects people who, it means that the baptism list is probably too large. It's interesting that we take as much care as we do for having believable statistics. Because the Mormons don't care at all. They believe their statistics, and it's just unbelievable.
What is it that attracts people to witnesses or Mormons or Adventists? I used to think that it was the networking or upward mobility of the Adventists, but is it still? Or what is it that what a person becomes a witness? Why? I've seen them all over Europe. I've seen them all over the place. They just stand there and pass out literature. But what is it? Do you know?
I must say I wouldn't feel attracted to join the witnesses because they are far too strict and compelling people to do witnessing.
But
You don't
why
do it, you don't count. And if you leave, they shun you. I mean, the guy who I write with, who's married to a witness, has 3 kids. His younger son left the witnesses. The first 2, the first boy and the girl, work full time for the witnesses. So they've stayed really committed. But the son didn't. And then he stopped going to the Kingdom Hall. And then he met a woman, and she was Catholic, and he became a Catholic. When he stopped calling himself a witness, his mother then shunned him. And she does not speak to that son and hasn't since. That's what happens in the witnesses. It's a very inhumane group. But they attract people who are looking for answers, and they've got the apparent answers. I think people do become Adventists in the developing world. It's important of this upward mobility. As I was told in Papua New Guinea, Adventists get rich, and they do, compared to the others. And the same is true in Africa. We're going to be dealing with this next week when I talk about Adventists and animism. So we'll go into that in greater detail next week.
What in their respective philosophy account for the disparity between witnesses and Adventist education level? I asked that because my oldest daughter, she married a witness, and they discouraged her from continuing to higher education. They wanted her to just stop, get a little job, and relax. And she had a hard time, but they stayed together for years, but still, it was hard.
In Mexico, for example, if you remember the table, the witnesses have got more people graduating from high school than Adventists have, proportionately. But they have fewer going to university. Because basically, you are encouraged to get out and witness. The Lord is coming. Why go ahead with your education? That could have been the case for Adventists too, couldn't it? But it hasn't been. I think that helps to explain. They discourage further education, but you've got to be educated enough to be able to understand their very complicated stuff. It's very complicated.
The Seventh-day Adventist educational system is considered the second largest in the world after the Catholic system. But from your data, it looks like the Mormons and the witnesses, in some regards, they are better educated than the Seventh-day Adventists. As a general conclusion, what do you think would be the cause for that?
I think that it's the poverty of our own people. They can't afford in the developing world to go to Adventist colleges. In Mexico, for example, they've got 3 universities, but they're mostly in the north. 2 of them are in the north. And whereas the 3/4 of the membership is in the south. They're very poor. They can't afford to travel. They can't afford to pay the tuition. But I remember being told by people in the south, in Chiapas, in Villahermosa, that we, in villages, we can't afford to go to school beyond whatever the local village school will go, maybe grade 6. But we do better than our neighbours do, even though we pay tithe, because it makes us more careful and we don't waste money on such things as alcohol. And I heard that from a number of people in southern Mexico. I've got to wait for somebody to get microphones.
I'm coming to John first. I'll throw it to you. Go deep. And see, and then I think I've got you, and then Sharon.
My question, I'm not sure, is this working?
Yeah.
My question has to do with, again, the mass conversion. That's one of the things you touched on, sir. I remember, Dr. Branson, you made a presentation some months back about a charismatic German pastor who ministered in parts of Africa, and he had huge numbers of people baptized. I think one of his rallies or meetings, was it like 50,000 that were converted or something? I mean, with huge numbers like that, are they even able to be put on the books? I guess they are. And then what kind of follow-up would there be to see indeed if they remain that?
I can tell you some stuff about that. Let's look at Africa. Until more recent years, people who were wanting to become Adventists in Africa were typically placed in baptismal classes which would go for 3 years. 3 years of baptismal class, because the missionaries considered that they were too unsophisticated. They've got to really get into the Adventist stuff. That's no longer true, of course. It's now a 2 or 3 week campaign, and then people are baptized. I remember in Kenya, there'd been a huge campaign over in Western Kenya, in the Adventist region, and they baptized a lot of young people. They didn't have a church. They met in a playing field, and if it rained, they didn't meet, because they didn't have a building. I remember going to Kinshasa in the Congo, capital of the Congo. There'd been 2 Adventist campaigns there a year apart, 3 years before I got there, 3 and 2 years before I got there. Between them, they baptized well over 1,000 people. I had the opportunity to go to a meeting of the pastors of Kinshasa, and I said to them, I'm interested in knowing how many of those people who were baptized 2 or 3 years ago are still attending church. And they were talking to each other in their own language, and they were going like this. 50, 50. So very large fall off. But there is also here, if we are an Anglican, an Episcopalian, and we become an Adventist, we think of ourselves as becoming an Adventist, no longer being an Episcopalian. But in the developing world, in many parts, you can have several insurance policies. So that, for example, I was told that this happens, an Adventist evangelist will come through and people will be baptized. And a year later, a Pentecostal evangelist will be there, and the same people will be baptized. They'll still attend the Adventist church, but they've got an additional insurance policy.
Just want to make sure I read your statistics correctly. So in America, there's the higher memberships of the educated people were in the Mormon and witnesses than Adventists also?
I didn't show you educated stuff
Or,
for America.
okay, it was just
And
Third Mexico,
off my head, I can't tell you the answer to that one.
But do they have a higher membership in America?
The Mormons have got 6 or 7 million people in America.
I'm just wondering, in the more developed countries, what is the attraction? It's similar to a question that's already been answered. What is the attraction to educated people about Mormonism and the witness religion as opposed to Adventism? You'd think that Adventism makes a little more sense. It's more of a reasonable religion. What is it that appeals to educated people about Mormonism and the witness religion?
Did you say the witnesses or the Mormons or both?
Both.
I think that the Mormons attract educated people because they've got it's sort of like an educated club, a culturally aware club. They have high family values these days. It's funny how from the polygamists they become to high family values, but that's where they are. And they become active in politics and stuff like that. You can feel like you're having an impact on society. Adventists don't feel that. Those of us who are educated can be feeling frustrated about that too, I think. And Mormons are much better at keeping their educated people than they are keeping the poorer people. And I think with Adventists, it's a bit the other way. We lose a lot of our educated people who are educated.
Sherry?
Pardon me, I don't actually have a question, but I have to give my experience as an Adventist child growing up in a Mormon town. The Mormons supplied all sorts of recreation. Everybody who possibly could of the kids went to the Mormon church to play basketball, to go to dances, to do all kinds of stuff. We used to call ourselves the Dumb Dozen, a dozen of us girls. I think one was an Episcopalian, I don't remember, but they all went to that. They all went to that, and they still, in our 80s, retain some connections, friendships, and so forth that they made in those days. Mormon evangelism goes on all the time, but it's very personal. There's a junior college in the next little town. It's a state college, but the president is Mormon, and pretty much all the teachers are. But I met one of the teachers who was not a Mormon, took a class from her. She told me she had found out that the Mormons teachers are assigned a faculty member that is not Mormon. They are to make 6 attempts at becoming friends. If the 6 attempts don't work, that's okay. But they have to make 6 attempts, at least in those days. And having had Mormon missionaries come to visit us and having had Mormon friends, that have tried to influence me, they'll say, ask the Lord to show you by a burning in your bosom that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. Well, if they have worked on you and you know nothing about the Bible, and they're telling you all this stuff that sounds really, well, you can work yourself into an emotional burning in the bosom. I think they do what we call now grooming people. I think people are baptized without really having any idea what the finer points of Mormonism are. Did you know that the reason Utah has a firing squad as execution is because the Mormons believe that there are some sins that Christ's blood is not efficacious for. Your own blood has to be shed before you can be forgiven. And you can't take a pill. You have to shed your blood. Anyway.
The comment on that, let's go to the next person. Right here.
Do you have any statistics that reveal how many people are brought into the Adventist Church with the evangelistic campaigns and those that stay year by year?
Monty Celine has done a lot of stuff on this in the United States. And it's fairly widely believed that people leave a lot. A lot of them leave. He argues that it's Adventists generally who are leaving, not just the recent converts. That our own kids are leaving in large numbers, and people who become and who've been Adventists quite a long time can become disillusioned. Our churches have a lot of fights in them, don't they? And at least some of them do. And people can become disillusioned and leave, or can you just become too uncomfortable?
All right, I've got one more question here. I know there's some more, but I got it.
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is as big as it is when you stop and think we worship on a different day.
Yes.
We're completely out of step in the community. When it comes to work, we have to struggle in order to find work that fit with our beliefs. So I think there's something divine within our movement that others may not have. That's just one observation.
Amen.
Okay. We continue this discussion next week, and it's going to be on animism.
Yes.
Okay.
Adventism and animism.
Okay. By the way, as I used to pastor, I remember going to new districts and people would say, you know, Elder, we really need to clean a bunch of people off the books. It's not glorifying to God. And then I would say, does this have anything to do with ingathering? And invariably it did. It would reduce the goals. So anyway, just trying to think. Next week we have part 3. And you have all this material online, am I correct? And that is, again?
My website is www.ronaldlawson.net. It's nice and easy. ronaldlawson.net.
Okay. Thank you very much. Remember, if you do not get our emails, sign up here. And I'm going to ask that after you have the benediction, if you could pass these, either appreciate it. Thank you again very much, Dr. Lawson, for this insightful presentation. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.